Good morning, and welcome to our talk on the geology of Black Lace. I am Shannon Bay, the Program Manager of Adult and Community Engagement at the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum. I would like to begin by recognizing the lands of the Pueblo people on which the sites of the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum stand. We recognize and honor their elders, past and present, and celebrate the vitality of their people today and into future generations. I offer this with humility and gratitude, in acknowledgement of the need to confront the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism. Now for some Zoom housekeeping. If you have not done so, please introduce yourself in the chat box. To find the chat, go to the bottom of your screen and click on chat. If you're using an iPad, the chat can be found at the top of your screen. It will then appear and you have the option to send a message to everyone or just the panelists. We invite you to share your location with everyone so we can see where people are tuning in from around the world. Please also utilize the chat box for questions throughout the presentation, of which our presenter, Kirt Kempter, will answer at the end. Closed captioning is also available. To access closed captioning, you're going to go to the top or bottom of your screen, depending on your device, and click the CC to turn it on or off, depending on your preference. I would like to extend thank you to our members and donors who are here today. Your support made this event possible, and if you're not yet a member and enjoy this program, please consider joining today. Visit gokm.org/membership to learn more. I am now pleased to introduce our presenter for this talk, Kirt Kempter. Kirt Kempter is a Fulbright Fellow and Ph.D. graduate from the University of Texas at Austin, now living in Santa Fe, New Mexico. A volcanologist and field geologist, Kirt has conducted extensive field research in Costa Rica, Mexico, and New Mexico, and has worked with the NASA astronaut training program, providing field geologic training to astronaut candidates. His interest in global geologic processes has allowed him to lead field-oriented expeditions to destinations such as Iceland, Australia, New Zealand, South America, Africa, and Antarctica. Kirt has led educational tours for Smithsonian journeys and National Geographic expeditions since 1993, and greatly enjoys sharing his passion and knowledge of geology with tour participants. On the side, Kirt particularly enjoys photography, cooking, and tennis. Please welcome Kirt.
Okay, thanks for that introduction, Shannon, and welcome everybody. It's a pleasure to always do a collaboration with the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum. They have a wonderful staff. It's a wonderful organization. And, you know, I think we all appreciate this landscape in northern New Mexico the way Georgia O'Keeffe did. So I don't think she studied much geology, but she certainly was a student of erosion. She loved the way northern New Mexico, the landscape looked with all the erosion that's taken place, exposing all the different layers of rocks, the shapes that the erosion makes. She was captivated by different shapes. So, in a way, she was a student of geology while she was living here. Okay, I feel sorry for those of you on the East Coast. It was fun to watch the chat introductions there and seeing people from all over the country, as well as friends and acquaintances here in Santa Fe pop up real quickly. So welcome to everybody near and far. But yeah, it's tough on the East Coast where you've already had lunch and you're getting that 1 p.m. lecture slot, which is deadly. I'll be putting you to sleep. Okay, let me share my screen and get started here. There we go. All right, today it's going to be a talk on the Black Place. And of course, that's just the name that Georgia gave it. There's no kind of name for it that I've come across anywhere else. Before I get started here, Georgia did live a little bit in Santa Fe, and Santa Fe's always attracted artists from the beginning, even going back 10,000 BC. And artists have always struggled to make a living. So I really appreciate this cartoon by Tundra. And Georgia was one of the few people that figured it out and actually during her life made a pretty good living being an artist. So this is a picture of Georgia camping at the Black Place. And I think last year, gosh, maybe it was 2 years ago now, I went out with a few staff from the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum, and we tried to find the location of a few photos of her taken out at the Black Place, and we were successful. So just to show you, this is kind of what that same area looks like right now. Go back there. So we stood, it's always fun to see these photographs of Georgia O'Keeffe in the places she loved to paint, be it the Black Place, Abiquiu, Ghost Ranch, and to try and find exactly where that photograph was taken. So that was a little fun quiz we did out there, and we're successful. So this is a quote Georgia made about the Black Place. "I must have seen the Black Place first driving past on a trip into the Navajo country, and having seen it, I had to go back to paint. As you come to it over a hill, it looks like a mile of elephants, gray hills all about the same size with almost white sand at their feet. Such a beautiful, untouched, lonely feeling place." So I'm sorry to say it doesn't really feel that lonely anymore, but I'll talk about that in a minute. Anyway, just to show you a couple of her paintings from the Black Place. And as I said before, she really was a student of erosion. So she loved the shapes of the mounds and the little gullies and arroyos that water would make as it's eroding these clay-rich mounds at the Black Place, and some of the different layers and the different colors, of course. And then she would add her own little abstract perspective on the reality of what she was looking at. So I love her paintings from the Black Place. They're really gorgeous. So this is a Google Earth oblique image at the Black Place. And this is Highway 550 today, which basically goes from Cuba, New Mexico, traveling to the northwest to Farmington, New Mexico. And as you're traveling on 550, right around mile marker 111, that's where you come down from this small hill down into this lower area, and you see these black or dark gray mounds that so attracted her. And you can see that farther away from the highway, you get much more. And in this kind of broad perspective, you can see that there's lots and lots of eroding badlands in this area. This is actually called the Liebrook Badlands that the Black Place is part of. And you can see the not much vegetation, is very, very dry out there. And the rocks are such that it's difficult to form a soil profile. So there's much exposure of the layered sedimentary rocks throughout the Liebrook Badlands. Looking directly above on Google Earth, you can see the highway right there. And of course, appreciate how these dark gray mounds look. So very, very unusual shape. And you can also appreciate the white sand layer that's at the base of the black mound layers there. If I pull back on Google Earth to show a little bit more, here's the highway again. These are the deposits we were just looking at close to the highway. But you can also see there's much more of this kind of Black Place scenery, erosion. If you're someone like me that enjoys getting beyond the easy highway stuff and hiking into the unknown, that's where you will really be rewarded with beautiful colors, textures, arroyos, etc. So this is one of the photos I took from not near the highway, but just go over a nice ridge into the adjacent valley. And then you feel like you are alone out there with no really human footprint around. And you can also appreciate from this photo, we still have the dark gray mounds, softly eroded mounds, but also these other stripes in here of different colors, white, there's red stripes in there. So quite a variety of colors as well. So the reality today, though, when you go to the Black Place, is there is a big footprint of the oil and gas industry right in the vicinity. There hasn't been any protection around the Black Place. There's a large movement to help protect the Chaco Canyon area. But anyway, I'll show you two Google Earth photos. One aspect I like in Google Earth is it has a history button where you can go back and see the same view, but from different uploads in the past by Google Earth. And so this is looking at, of course, here's our Black Place near the highway right there from 2015, and then push the history button up to 2017. And here are 5 oil and gas platforms that were developed just in those 2 years. Right around the Black Place there. So just to go back, nothing, no roads, nothing in there, jump in there. Now we've got, so it's not certainly what Georgia experienced when she was there. And we didn't have a paved highway at that time either. And the San Juan Basin, which is the broader area we're going to be talking about, where the Black Place is located pretty much in the middle of the San Juan Basin, is a huge kind of oil and gas reservoir that New Mexico generates. Most of our revenue as a state comes from our oil and gas industry, and the San Juan Basin is a huge part of that. We get most of our oil and gas from either southeastern New Mexico or northwestern New Mexico. And the northwest would be the San Juan Basin. And there's literally, a couple thousand at least oil and gas locations in the San Juan Basin. So there's a couple thousand straws that are tapping into this oil and gas reservoir in the San Juan Basin everywhere. This is a geologic map of the San Juan Basin in northwestern New Mexico. For those of you familiar with the geography, we have over here to the lower right, we have the Nacimiento Mountains and the Jemez Mountains with the Valles Caldera. This is a magnificent 1.25 million year old crater from a huge eruption that formed the Valles Caldera. It's a national park. And these black lines represent geologic faults. So we have a big boundary running pretty much north-south here in New Mexico. And on the west side of that boundary, we start the San Juan Basin that goes all the way up into the Four Corners region. Here is the town of Farmington and the town of Shiprock up here to the northwest. Highway 550 between Cuba, driving up to Bloomfield, Farmington. Black Place is about halfway on that drive. The Black Place is often confused in the literature with the Bisti Badlands. And the Bisti Badlands is farther to the west over here. It's a wilderness area. It's been joined with adjacent badlands called Denazine. So it's one wilderness area right there. And there's lots of badlands in between the Bisti and Cuba. I'll mention that a little bit later in the talk. But this is a geologic map. And on a geologic map, the different colors represent different types of rock at different ages in the geologic past. And one of the dominant colors you see on this geologic map are different colors of green, different shades of green. And all of the green colors on this map were sedimentary rocks deposited during the Cretaceous period. And most of you are familiar with the Cretaceous period. It's in the Mesozoic era. And it's the time of dinosaurs, of course. We had lots and lots of dinosaurs in New Mexico. But most importantly, it's the last time New Mexico had an ocean covering much of our state. So I'll be talking about the Cretaceous Seaway. And the bulk of these green colors on this map represent ocean mud deposits from that Cretaceous sea. So you can see on this geologic map, we have Cretaceous sea deposits here to the west, to the south, over here to the east as well. And if we went far enough into Colorado, those same layers are up there as well. These Cretaceous deposits are buried by younger sediments that are these colors of kind of browns and oranges in this zone right here. So these are younger layers that are actually post Cretaceous, and they were deposited after the dinosaurs go extinct, with the exception of birds. So birds, we believe, are a branch of the dinosaurs, and a few species of birds survived the Great Extinction. And from those few survivors, all the modern day birds that we have today have evolved in the last 66 million years. But anyway, these are younger deposits after the Great Extinction 66 million years ago, and they are on top of these older Cretaceous rocks. So we refer to the San Juan Basin as a basin because in geology, it literally is a bowl-shaped feature by the geology. You can have a basin topographically by erosion forming a bowl, but the San Juan Basin is actually a geologic basin where sedimentary layers that once were horizontal have been tilted and folded downward, downwarped, in a feature we'd call a syncline basin, structural basin. So if we take a cross-section look at this San Juan Basin, this would be from south heading to north. Those brown and orange layers, the youngest ones, are shown here. You can see in this cross section. Then we have all the colors of green. And again, most of these represent Cretaceous ocean mud deposits here. And below those, we get back into older periods of the Mesozoic era into the Jurassic period and the Triassic period even. So it's a real thick package of sedimentary rocks deposited throughout the Mesozoic era, the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous periods. And these once horizontal layers have been warped downward to create this San Juan Basin. You can see going from south to north, the dip on these for this diagram is exaggerated, but basically the tilting of these layers is much more extreme to the north than it is to the south. And if we were to have the same cross section going from northwest to southeast, we would see a similar. The tilting is much greater on the eastern and the northern side, and much less on the south and the western side. So what I'd first like to do is take everybody on a Google Earth flight around the perimeter of the San Juan Basin so that you can appreciate this geography of the basin. So we're going to start in Gallup and fly in a counterclockwise fashion around the San Juan Basin, and just appreciate that the sedimentary strata over by Gallup, they're dipping down, which would be to the north. When we're over by Cuba, the sedimentary strata are dipping down to the west, which would be, always towards in the interior of the basin. And when we're at Durango, you'll see that the sedimentary strata are dipping down into the basin, which would be dipping down to the south. So with no further, before we start our flight, the main reason this is a structural geologic basin is on all sides, we've had uplift. We went through a long period that I'll be talking about where New Mexico was rising. We were feeling tremendous tectonic forces of compression, and these tectonic forces caused chunks of our crust to rise, including the Chusca Defiance uplift over here to the west, the Zuni uplift to the south, the Nacimiento uplift to the east, and the San Juan uplift to the north. So it's really the uplift of these mountains that led to the tilting of the strata into the basin that's in between these uplifts. Okay, so we're going to start from space. and we'll drop down here towards Gallup, and you'll recognize I-40, those of you that have driven east-west on I-40. So now we're just above I-40, and we'll turn around, and you can see as we head east from Gallup, you see these nice red cliffs. They are dipping down to the north. So this is our part of our San Juan Basin tilt. And as we continue to the east on I-40, we now come to a beautiful volcano, 2.5 to 3 million years old. This is Mount Taylor. It's got a gorgeous erosional caldera up on top. And as we head to the northeast from there, it's got a broad lava capped mesa plateau, and then a series of these volcanic necks or plugs, including Cabezon, which is the biggest one out there. Now we're over to the east side of the San Juan Basin, and a really pronounced boundary between the basin to the left and the Nacimiento Mountains to the right. As we keep going to the north, beautiful town of Gallina, New Mexico. And you can appreciate these are these hogback ridges curving across the landscape that are dipping down into the San Juan Basin. Here's El Vado Reservoir. We're up near Chama now. And at this point, we're going to spin around and turn to the northwest. And we'll be heading towards the border with Colorado, and crossing that border just a little bit on our way to Durango. So we're now seeing the effects of the San Juan uplift. And again, you can see these hogback ridges near Durango. They're dipping down to the south into the San Juan Basin. So here's the town of Durango, the La Plata Mountains behind it there. And now we'll kind of finish our flight heading back down a little bit to the southwest. And we're going towards one of the probably most famous rock features in northwestern New Mexico, Shiprock, which is a 27 million year old deeply eroded volcano that's got radiating dikes from the main central vent there. Shiprock in a Navajo Diné country right there. So at this point, we'll pull back and get that perspective of the entire San Juan Basin again, and the route that we just traveled. So nice uplifts on all sides of the San Juan Basin here, and the uplift of the Zuni, Defiance, Nacimiento, San Juans has created this geologic structural basin. Okay, I want to talk about the Cretaceous Sea a bit. Before we get into the layers that make up, that we find right at the Black Place, what the layers at the Black Place are overlying these deposits from the Cretaceous Sea. And it truly is one of the most remarkable periods in time for North America in our geologic past, because for about 30 million years, we had this Cretaceous Sea bisecting North America into two islands, Appalachia to the east, Laramidia to the west. And essentially, the Gulf of Mexico flooded to the north, the Arctic Ocean came down from the north to the south, and they joined up for about 30 million years during the Cretaceous period. And it's just an incredible period of time. We don't think we had polar ice caps, so sea levels at a high, certainly more than 300 feet higher than what it is today. And during this Cretaceous period, because of high sea level and very consistent warm global temperatures, low parts of all the world's continents were flooded by shallow oceans. So not only did North America do we have Cretaceous Sea deposits, but there are Cretaceous Sea deposits in Australia, in Africa, in Europe, in South America. So global sea level high, consistent warm temperatures, even at high northerly latitudes. So lots and lots of vegetation along the coastline of the Cretaceous Sea, and lots of dinosaurs along the coastline of the Cretaceous Sea. These would be dinosaurs including, T-Rex and other tyrannosaurs. It would include Triceratops, ankylosaurs, a lot of vegetarian dinosaurs, iguanodonts, hadrosaurs, etc. But all these dinosaurs, remember, were on land. We didn't have any dinosaurs in the oceans, but we did have marine reptiles like plesiosaurs, ichthyosaurs were swimming in this Cretaceous sea. The most abundant fossil, when you're looking though at Cretaceous ocean deposits, is you find a tremendous amount of different variety of clams and oysters in the Cretaceous sea. If you are somewhere in limestone deposits and you're finding lots of crinoids and brachiopods, you're in an older ocean, probably before the dinosaurs, back in the Paleozoic time. But anywhere in the planet where we had Cretaceous sea deposits, really oysters, different clams were thriving in terms of shelled invertebrate creatures. All right, so to talk about this Cretaceous sea, for the whole time that we had the Cretaceous sea in existence, we had a plate tectonic collision going on between our plate, the North American plate, and a plate out in the Pacific Ocean called the Farallon plate. Our plate was made up of oceanic crust, which is very thick. It's very buoyant, continental crust. The Farallon plate, on the other hand, was dense, made up of essentially basalt. So the collision between these two plates produced a process we call subduction. This same process is going on all around the Pacific Ring of Fire today. But for North America, at this time during the Cretaceous, this Farallon plate was being subducted, forced underneath our North American plate. And in terms of the cross-section schematics of what that would look like, if you consider this to be Eastern California here and our part of the North American plate, here's the Farallon plate made up of thin, dense oceanic crust. It's colliding, it's being forced underneath the North American plate. As it dives underneath, it is being recycled back into the mantle. It's taking down a fair bit of seawater with it. And eventually, as it dives down, the pressures increase, the temperatures increase, the water, we get the fluids rising off that boundary, and we start getting melting in the mantle above, and we start forming magmas that rise into the crust. And so at this point in time, there were many active volcanoes in the Sierra Nevadas of Eastern California by this process, while we had the Cretaceous Sea covering up New Mexico. So this is kind of what it would look like just before the Cretaceous Sea is going to connect. So this would be about 120 million years ago. And I'm showing you these paleo ancient geographic images that were produced by a colleague, Ron Blakey, retired from Northern Arizona University. He's an excellent geologist and an excellent computer graphics person. So he comes up with these, what did the Earth look like at different periods in geologic time based on all the geologic studies. He incorporates all these to interpret where the coastline was, where were the mountains, where were rivers, etc. So we're in the early Cretaceous period, and that Farallon plate going underneath North America was causing lots of uplift and mountain building along our western margin that we call the severe orogeny, or severe mountain building phase. However, as these mountains were building and growing, we weren't feeling compression. New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, Alberta, we weren't feeling the compression by that collision. And as these mountains grew, they started to depress the crust. And so all this land adjacent to the mountains was being pushed down too by the weight of the mountains to the west. And with sea level rising, we start flooding such that by 105 million years ago, we've connected up for the first time these two oceans and have a Cretaceous seaway bisecting North America into two islands, Laramidia and Appalachia. So we're in that wonderful period jump forward to 90 million years ago, we still have the Cretaceous Sea. At this point in time, for us in New Mexico and Colorado, we're depositing a tremendous amount of organic rich ocean mud that we call the Mancos Shale. And we get a couple thousand feet in Colorado Springs, we have 5,000 feet of Mancos Shale being deposited during this time period. Jump forward to 80 million years ago, we have a younger ocean mud deposit we call the Lewis Shale being deposited in New Mexico and Colorado. Okay, so just to say briefly what little I can about oil and gas, because I'm not a petroleum geologist, but the reason we get so much oil and gas from the San Juan Basin and from this Cretaceous Sea, it's not from swamp deposits along the coastline. It's not from animals, plant or animal life in the ocean of megascopic scale. It's basically single-celled algae and zooplankton that are living and dying by the billions in the Cretaceous Sea. And when they die, those single-cell creatures start to accumulate with the clay and mud on the sea floor. Now, we think that the Cretaceous Sea in many, many places had very poor bottom circulation. So it was oxygen deprived, and that allowed the preservation of this organic material. And so we keep piling on this organic rich single-celled dead creatures in the mud, and that's going to be your organic source. And then you keep burying these deposits in time as we're starting to lose the Cretaceous Sea, and we start to bury those organic rich muds in younger sedimentary rocks. And we increase the pressure on those organic rich muds. We increase the temperatures with burial, and that starts to lead to the formation of oil and gas within the shale. They call this in the oil industry catagenesis, this conversion of kerogen into, essentially it's going to be into crude oil. And ideal temperatures for the formation of oil, you need to get up in the 150 to 300 degrees Fahrenheit and a little bit higher than 300 degrees to help produce gas. So jump forward to today in the San Juan Basin, where we have our surface way up here, and we have that source rock still deeply buried. And some of that oil and gas migrates up through the layers and becomes trapped in reservoir rock. And then if we're able to tap down into these reservoir rocks with 1,000, 2,000 straws, that's how we're getting our oil and gas in the San Juan Basin. Okay, so at 70 million years ago, things are starting to change though. That's when we lose this connection between the north and the south, and we're starting to uplift the land of New Mexico for the first time. And we're starting to push out that Cretaceous Sea. So we have not had an ocean covering New Mexico in the past 70 million years because of this uplift. So jump forward just to 65 million years ago, and this Cretaceous Sea is essentially gone, with the exception of a few salty remnants up here in what we now have Canada. And by the time the dinosaurs go extinct, we're starting, not only have we pushed out the Cretaceous Sea, but we're rising mountains in New Mexico, Colorado, and Wyoming. This is the Laramide orogeny, or the Rocky Mountain uplift. The older, earlier mountains we call the Sevier. This is the Laramide episode. And basically, we're talking between 75 to 40 million years ago is going to be the crux of this mountain building period. So what's causing it? Why are we now starting to uplift New Mexico and form these younger Rocky Mountains? Well, the leading theory is that for tens of millions of years, while we had the Cretaceous Sea, in fact, we had that subduction, and the Farallon plate was subducting at a fairly steep angle and being recycled back into the mantle. But over here in New Mexico and Colorado, we were far enough away, we didn't feel any of that compression. but we did get lots of volcanoes, et cetera, in Sierra Nevada volcanism during that time period. So we think that starting around 75 million years ago, that the Farallon plate, as it's being subducted, started to flatten out and started to be pushed underneath the crust of the Colorado Plateau, and eventually underneath the crust of New Mexico and Colorado, even on the eastern side of the Colorado Plateau. So we think it's this flattening out of the Farallon plate being now shoved underneath the Colorado Plateau that starts this period of great compression and uplift that's going to put an end to the Cretaceous Sea. So it's a pretty amazing transformation in 10 million years to go from most of New Mexico being below sea level to now we're on the rise by 65 million years ago. Mountains are starting to form. We're already starting to get the Nacimiento Mountains, the Zuni uplift, the San Juan uplift, and we've pushed out that Cretaceous Sea. So now just think of that Farallon plate. It's for the first time being pushed underneath Colorado, New Mexico, Wyoming, et cetera, forming the younger chain of Rocky Mountains. All right, so as we get these mountains rising in New Mexico, for northern New Mexico, it's going to be 3 blocks: the San Luis Sangre de Cristo uplift, the Nacimientos, and the Zuni. And remember, to the north, we have the San Juan uplift, and to the west, we've got the Chusca Defiance uplift. In between these uplifts in northern New Mexico, we did have low areas that sediments could be deposited in. So for our story in the San Juan Basin, as these mountains are rising, rivers are going to start transporting sediment from these mountains into the San Juan Basin. So now we're going to be depositing, even though New Mexico is rising and under great compression, we are going to be depositing these younger layers after the dinosaurs go extinct into the San Juan Basin. And one of those layers, of course, is going to be the Nacimiento Formation, which is the unit you see at the black place. All right, so the Nacimiento Formation, what is it exactly? It is a real mix of different sedimentary rocks, mostly deposited by rivers and lakes. So the deposits would be classified as sandstones, siltstones, mudstones, or shales, and they're often interbedded. Usually the sandstones, in this picture here, those would be the best sandstones, or these kind of brownish areas. Usually once they turn into stone during the rock formation process below surface, they develop a better cementation. And so now that they're eroding, they are more resistant to eroding. These other layers have a lot more clay, and they would be more classified as shales. And the sandstones usually represent rivers that had a current. So you're not really depositing the clays in these sandstone dominated units. They actually represent river deposits that had a current. The current was able to keep those clays in suspension, but sand would be deposited. When you're in these really fine clay units, you're really not in a river channel. You are in what we call overbank flood deposits, where in the stagnant water, the clays would settle out, giving these more clay-like layers. And if you have these dark gray bands, that's where we've preserved a lot of organic material. Keep in mind, these aren't ocean deposits. These aren't Cretaceous Sea. These are river, and essentially you're in swamp deposits, very, very organic rich layers, especially when you're in these blackish areas. So you do get, with the alternating shale, siltstone, sandstones that are eroding, you get these beautiful formations in all the badlands. And it's very common to get petrified wood. This is a big petrified log right here in back of this unique formation right there. When you're in the clay-rich areas, they develop a texture today that we call kind of a popcorn texture, because these clay minerals can often absorb water when it rains and expand. And then when they dry out, they shrink and desiccate, and that creates this kind of bizarre texture. And I have to say, if you go to the Black Place or any of these badlands after it's had a day or two of rain, it's virtually impossible to hike anywhere, because these clays, when they're wet, they are like slick ice. All right, so we're in the Nacimiento Formation. The age of these deposits are basically 65.5 million years ago to 61 million years ago. So they were deposited over a span of about 4.5 million years. They are composed of sedimentary rocks, shale, siltstone, sandstone, and they tell us the landscape in the San Juan Basin at that time was very flat and had lazy, meandering streams and rivers, many little swamp areas with lots of vegetations, and different small lakes as well. Most of the sediment for the Nacimiento Formation was coming from uplifts to the north and to the east, the San Juan and Nacimiento uplifts. And we can tell by pollen and the different fossils, especially plant fossils, that the climate during that time was hot and humid. We were not a desert at all. It was part of a global warming trend that peaked around 55 million years ago. That's been the hottest the Earth has been probably in the last 100 million years, was around 55 million years ago. So we were kind of leading up to this very, very warm time in Earth history. The Nacimiento Formation, it was deposited as these uplifts were happening all around the San Juan Basin, and our Rocky Mountains were rising in New Mexico. So that would include the Sangre de Cristos, the Tusis Mountains, and the Nacimiento Mountains. We find lots of angiosperm plant fossils that tell us it was a wet, hot, subtropical environment. The dark organic rich shales had lush swamps, lazy rivers. We find lots and lots of fossils in the Nacimiento Formation, but not a lot of big fossils. You know, it took animal life a long time to start developing big creatures again. In terms of reptiles, there's lots of turtles, lizards, snakes, and crocodile fossils that we find in the Nacimiento Formation. And, you know, we had these old archaic mammal fossils. In fact, the Nacimiento Formation is becoming world famous because it's rare to get fossils from sediments at this time, right after the dinosaurs go extinct. So it's a real important period in terms of the evolution of especially mammals going on. And you would not recognize any of these mammals, you know, that you wouldn't see them as early horses, elephants, cows, primates, etc. That I'll show you what they look like in just a minute. But including, we find some marsupial fossils. But also because we had a lot of freshwater streams and lakes, we find a lot of fish, gastropod, and bivalve fossils in the Nacimiento Formation. I think today, you know, we have over 120 different mammal species that have been discovered in the Nacimiento Formation, and most of these we would classify as paleoplacental mammals that eventually would be replaced by neoplacental mammals over the next 10 million years. And it's these neoplacental mammals that would be the ancestors of the modern mammals that we know and are familiar with that dominate our planet today. So what did they look like, these early mammals roaming around these swamps in northwestern New Mexico? Well, this is one that was kind of a medium to large sized dog in size. Got to be about 20 kilograms. It's a primitive hoofed mammal, had 5 toes, and based on its dentition, suggests that it ate really kind of rough vegetation along with roots and stems, etc. So mostly a herbivore, I'm not sure, Peripticus, I think is how you pronounce it. Another couple of these early mammals, the one on top here, they believe was arboreal and may have had a prehensile tail. So think of this guy, Criacus, as kind of a giant, kind of living in a niche like a giant squirrel in trees in these swampy environments. More of a land dweller down here below, Phenacodus, but also kind of a very small dog size in terms of when it's an adult. So lots of these early mammals kind of occupied shrew-like niches. Some of them were nocturnal, some of them were arboreal, some were omnivores, herbivores, and carnivores, as well, insectivores. And even some primitive marsupials roaming around in these swampy environments as well. Just to show you, some of the plant fossils, these are some leaf fossils that are found in the Nacimiento Formation as well. All right, so today, when you are hiking in these badlands of the Nacimiento Formation, and it looks so desiccated, and you see this kind of badland topography, just appreciate that all these layers, what the area looked like when they were being deposited was something like the Atchafalaya swamp in Louisiana. Really lots of vegetation, meandering little rivers and lake environments. So couldn't look more different from the way it looks today, but that's what was depositing the layers we see there. So the dark organic rich layers, so that attracted Georgia, what she called the dark gray elephant mounds, those have a lot of organic material in them. So that process of formation, we'd have all those swampy vegetation. As it gets buried and starts to decay, it starts to form those organic mats we would call peat. And then you bury that peat layer under lots of other layers, and you have millions of years involved. You have the pressure of overlying layers and the heat from overlying layers, and you start that transition from peat going into lignite. And if you really bury those layers and bake them in the earth, you get that transformation of lignite going into coal, and the different aspects of coal, subbituminous, bituminous, and the highest grade anthracitic. We don't see any of this high grade stuff over in the Nacimiento Formation, but we would have stuff classify as lignite. So those organic rich layers in the Nacimiento Formation, just think of basically lots of swampy vegetation getting buried and baked with pressure and temperature, starting that kind of conversion into lignite. All right, lastly, it is 10:49. So just to finish up here, for those of you that are drawn to this Badlands scenery and would like to hike in the Badlands, there are a lot in the San Juan Basin. This is Cuba, New Mexico. This is Highway 550 going across the San Juan Basin to Bloomfield, Farmington. My personal favorites are the Bistay de Nazin Badlands over here, south of Farmington. Where we are for the Black Place is right here west of Liebrook. So that would be classified as the Liebrook Badlands. But there's many others. Ashish Lepa, near to Cuba, we have Mesa de Cuba, Penistaja, Ceja Pelon, Cejita Blanca. North of Cuba, the San Jose Badlands. So I would just kind of recommend going to Google and Google San Juan Basin Badlands, and you'll find lots of resources to how to explore these Badlands. All right, so in conclusion, the Black Place. The layers there are part of the Nacimiento Formation. They date back in the geologic past between 65.5 to 61 million years ago. They tell us that the San Juan Basin at that time was filled with lazy meandering rivers and lacustrine little lakes that deposited sediments of sandstones, siltstones, and shales. The climate was hot and humid and many swampy environments. And they contain lots of fossils, especially of these archaic mammals, turtles, reptiles, and including lots of plant fossils like angiosperms. And they were being deposited during this period of great compression. We had pushed out the Cretaceous Sea, but we had mountains uplifting on all sides of the San Juan Basin, especially the Nacimientos to the east and the San Juans to the north. And with that, I will stop sharing and turn the screen back over to my colleague, Shannon.
Thank you, Kurt. That was excellent. Well, our first question is, and please put questions in the chat. We'll have questions for about 10-15 minutes or so. Where relative to the equator of the Earth was the landmass of Black Place during the Cretaceous period?
That's a great question, and for when the dinosaurs go extinct, we have been moving southward since that point. The North American plate's been moving southward, but prior to that time, we had been moving to the north. So during that Cretaceous period, for most of that time, we were at latitudes farther north, certainly farther north than we are today. So I would guess we were more somewhere in between, even north of Denver during that, in terms of latitudes during that time. Okay.
Thank you. And even though Georgia O'Keeffe called it Black Place, there's a variety of colors that we see there. There's gray, white, black, there's pinks and reds. What accounts for those different colors, the gray, white, black, and pink rocks that you find there?
Yeah, a lot of it depends on what types of clay minerals are in those layers. And often the more pure sandstones, they tend to be white to yellow brown in color. And then if you're getting more of these reds and grays and purples, they relate to different clay minerals that have kind of different iron amounts and whether that iron is oxidized or not. So it has, subtle variations in the clay content and the oxidation of iron in those deposits give a really broad range of colors.
Mm-hmm. And how do trees become petrified in the badlands?
Well, probably the best way to petrify a tree is to have a flooding event, a big flooding event that will bury a tree, while it's alive, but then in the flood, of course, knock it over and bury it, and soon have it, be further buried so that, it can maintain that tree tree form after burial. And then later, as that layer is turning into stone, the lithification process, if you have groundwater passing through that tree that has dissolved silica, and the silica begins to precipitate out, replacing the cellulose structure in the tree, you essentially get the same structure of the tree that was cellulose, then preserved by these tiny silica crystals that have replaced it.
Thank you. And is any of the topography a result of the ash fallout from the caldera volcano event?
I would say probably no. Certainly when the Valles caldera went off 1.25 million years ago, a lot of ash did fall in the San Juan Basin. Mm-hmm. But the San Juan Basin in the last 1 to 2 million years has actually been eroding away. That's why we have all these badlands. it's no longer a basin of deposition. It's a basin that's undergoing erosion.
Mhm.
So these rivers that are crossing the San Juan Basin today, they're able to transport that material out. A lot of it into the San Juan River, that's a tributary to the Colorado River. So I think most of that ash from the Valles Caldera got removed pretty quickly.
Well, we also had a question about the thickness of the different layers. Do you know about how thick any of them are?
Well, I know that the Nacimiento Formation is certainly a couple 100 feet thick. It varies in thickness depending on what part of the basin you're in. I don't know offhand the maximum thickness of the Nacimiento layer, but I do know the Cretaceous ocean deposits underneath, are at least a couple 1,000 feet thick that are underlying. And so all told, those different sedimentary rocks going back not only the Cretaceous, but the Jurassic and the Triassic, you're probably looking at 5,000 feet of sedimentary rocks in the San Juan Basin.
Mm-hmm. Well, we had a question too about hiking this area. Is this public land that people can access?
Yeah, the Black Place is on BLM land. So it is, in a sense, yes, it's Bureau of Land Management. So it is public land. And, I think it's no problem hiking out there. I don't really know what the rules are in terms of all the roads that go to these different oil platforms, but I know I've driven lots of those, but you'd have to look into that.
Yeah.
I better not say anything.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Kirt. This has been a wonderful talk, and this recording will be available on the museum's YouTube channel for 1 week. So thank you. And thank you everyone
Thank you
for tuning
guys.
in. Okay.
Appreciate
Bye-bye.
it. Bye-bye.